Good morning, Vlad.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry, just got unmuted. There we go.
All right. Well, hi there, everybody. My name is Jordan Gentry Nelson, and I'm the Director of Programming here at Big Medium. Thank you all so much for being here. I'd love if we could start by having you all introduce yourselves in the chat. I know I see some familiar names here, but it's nice to know just who everybody is and what you do in the community. So please start with that, and then feel free to use the chat throughout the workshop to ask questions, or throughout the chat to ask questions. We do still want this to be interactive, so if there's a question relevant to the conversation or a piece of artwork that comes up or something that Coca or Vlad bring up, that you can just chat in there and we'll be monitoring that. But keep in mind, we'll be reserving time at the end of the coffee chat for audience Q&A. So if you want to hold till the end, you'll have an opportunity to turn your microphone on and ask the question yourself. So with that, welcome to Coffee Chats. This is a program of Creative Standard, which, if you're not familiar with, is the professional development wing of Big Medium. And through coffee chats like this, featuring leaders in the creative community, as well as regular workshops, our goal is to fortify and promote the creative, professional, and economic success of local artists. And today we have artist Vladimir Mejia with us, who will be chatting with our very own Coca Trevino, Big Medium's program coordinator. And as you may have seen last week, we had Janice Sweck as a new coffee chat facilitator, interviewer. So continue to expect different community members to show up as a part of coffee chats going forward. And again, we have Vladimir Mejia with us as our featured guest. And Vladimir is the Director of Social Media and Bitrise Curator at Collab Projects. He is a member of Ink Tank Collective and a founding member of Rossi Dustin. Vladimir is also a multidisciplinary artist who works in installation, sculpture, photography, performance art, printmaking, and digital media. And we were able to preview some of that variety in media through the introductory slideshow. Through his work, he uses interaction, humor, abstraction, and writing to tackle politics, race relations, generational divides, and the ever-evolving relationship between people and technology. So I won't say any more about that, and I'll let y'all take it away, Coca and Vlad. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so that was a very interesting and long list of things that you can do, and I love it because I've been able to be present for some of those performances, and I'm somewhat familiar with your work. Can you tell us a little bit more about this? Like, because we talked about some administrative duties, some creative duties, some curatorial. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us, like, besides you are being the creative, what are those links and how your practice functions for every different of those characteristics or those duties?
Yeah, I guess when I kind of started getting into art, it was kind of more in high school, really. So like my brother was always more of the artist in my family. But around that time that I started getting invested in art and started taking classes, I was also getting really into music, and just kind of looking at the parallels between music and visual arts. And for me, it kind of became this thing of like, well, if you could be a solo musician, but you could also be in a band, and then you could also produce an album, why can't an artist make work, collaborate, and curate? And it's not that I, do any of those things to an extreme at all times, but I'm thankfully I'm able to find time and room to kind of jump around different projects, and I'm pretty comfortable with working on a thing and pausing and moving to another, returning later. So for me, it's also just a way of staying engaged and not getting stuck into a cycle of making the same thing or working on the same project. And I feel as an artist, it's also like one of the best ways to learn is just to work with other artists, and especially with with the work I've been able to do with Collab. Those guys took me in when I was 17, starting college. So I was really learning not just what makes a good show, but how to light and how to write a statement and get a gallery ready, and all those things are for me are important because they help me grow as an artist. So it's why I like to kind of diversify the different ways that I'm engaging with the community.
Cool. Yeah, and I've noticed that too. Like your work is very collaborative. You take a lot of like aside of all the things that you're able to do and how like the different roles that you take, your actual work very often takes a lot from the community and from the spectator. Do you actually plan this that way, or you just like let it like mix and flow?
Yeah, definitely. I think something that I've always very conscious of and is important for me in my work, and I feel it's different for every artist, but I try to always be consciously aware of the audience. And that's not to say that I want to pander to the audience, but I feel like when you put work in a public space, you also have a responsibility to engage, because you're not putting anything into a vacuum. Yeah, for me, it's important to just engage and have those conversations.
Does that mean you have like a plan A, like this is the best way that it could go, but
yeah,
like there's also plan B, C, and D?
Yeah, I guess hopefully I'm not going through too many things, but for me, it's usually like my work starts with the idea of like what the message is supposed to be, and then that kind of determines what the medium and the actual context of the work is. So the first solo show I did at Pump Project had a lot to do with kind of just reacting to what was happening around me, like the news I was taking in. The type, like it was kind of also like the beginning of the Black Lives Matters movement, which is obviously very relevant now because of the things that are happening. And just like trying to bring those things to the forefront, to have conversations with people, and also understanding that like this art's not going to fix the real issues that need to be fixed, but maybe this could be part of just like a public discourse. And so it's a way of like making the work also like not just for yourself, but for other people that come from places like I grew up to relate and to feel engaged.
But that also means that you're leaving a lot of the control out.
Yeah, I think it's also one of those things where like the work always means a lot to me, and there's always a lot of personal narrative, but I don't think it's my responsibility to tell a person how they should take an artwork in or what it should mean to them. So if you see something in the art that maybe wasn't intentional, but is still meaningful to you, then I don't think as an artist, I have the right to tell you it's a different thing. It's kind of like how you could write a song and it means one thing, but it plays at a certain point in somebody else's life and it means something completely different to them. So as long as the work is engaging and even if you don't like it, if it makes you feel something, I think that's the most important thing. Is it's like the Baldessari thing of don't make boring art.
Yeah, that makes sense. But at the same time, I can see like your control part on the space. You work in many different spaces, and every piece it's very, at least that's my impression, like very well thought out and very specific to either if it's web, if it's like a hallway, if it's like a gallery. Like I can see both sides of that. Can you tell me a little bit about how you approach space?
Yeah, I think kind of going back to like my involvement in collab when I started going to UT and stuff is that up until then I hadn't really attended like actual exhibitions. My first exhibition opening was the first job I had at a gallery at the Visual Arts Center, and it was their grand opening, and I was completely out of my element. And then I got introduced to Sean Gallagher, the founder of Collab, through Chris Birch, who I met in school, who's one of the on the board of directors as well. And those guys, they were running that warehouse off of Allen and Hidalgo, and it was, it wasn't like a traditional space. And the fact that at that point, it was like every week there was an event. So it's kind of like a boot camp almost, and you're like, how do you elevate this space into a gallery space to the point where you forget that you're, in a warehouse or whatever. And doing literally hundreds of shows that way really like made it so that I just kind of realized and learned from those guys that it's not about having the pristine walls. It's more about what you can envision in the space. And I kind of started applying that also to, the phone with the Instagram residency and just kind of considering, this is a computer, this is a digital screen. So it's not, you're not going to be able to translate a white wall gallery into a digital space, but, what are the advantages of a digital space? It's like the high pixelation is the fact that, it's easily accessible to people around the world, even if you have like a cheaper smartphone, it's getting easier to like at least load up like a still image. And I think as that technology becomes more accessible, then things like video art can be a lot more spreadable as well and accessible to people. So you don't have to like travel to an inaccessible place to see the work.
Yeah, and that's super relevant right now too, like because how you've worked has been touching base on digital and accessibility and all these things that a lot of artists are just thinking about right now, like where you've been thinking about that for a long time. Is this change and this move to digital, like is that impacting you in any way? Are you viewing this differently? Are you already thinking about the next one?
Yeah, I don't know if it's like impacting my work, like my process directly, because my process still feels the same. I'm sure it's impacting everybody differently. But for me, it's been more of a, I don't know, I've kind of like, I guess the silver lining in it is that it's been a time for me to kind of like reset and really kind of like get back to my influences and things like that. As dumb as it sounds, just like actually having time to get home and sit down and watch a dumb show from the 90s and or something like that, or watch a movie, read a book or something like that. I think those things have been important just to kind of get back to like, because I think the thing that also happens in the art scene is you can get kind of lost in like the week to week, like event to event, show to show, and sometimes a reset is good. So I'm kind of trying to take advantage of that right now, and I'm sure the work will be different because it usually is, but I'm still waiting to see how all of that affects it. I have a cat now, so I'm definitely like, making changes. We'll see how
but media-wise, like the digital, like the screen.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's great to see people like actually starting to take it more seriously. It's not that there hasn't been other people doing digital work up until recently, but I think it's kind of like us having this conversation over a video thing. It's the realization that I guess you can use these digital tools to create, not simulate, but create new experiences and new ways of seeing things. I wonder too, like, how many people would be on this chat as opposed to like at the actual space at this time of day if things are normal. So I think no matter what happens, I definitely feel like we're gonna be getting back into whatever we return to won't be the same thing that we left. And I think all these mediums and ways to experience work digitally are going to become more important. And that's just how it's like TV. It's just a new technology, and we're still building. I think people are still finding the rules, and that's kind of what's exciting about it, is that it's fresh and nobody's really like set the model for what digital art has to be at least not in my mind. And whenever it happens, I'm sure there'll be some other new technology that people are into.
Yeah, and it's not it's a super open media. Like you can basically shape it the way that you want. And even if there's a ton of people just jumping on board of this, like you can just go a different way and create your own thing.
Yeah, I think the thing with digital work too is it's a very democratic way of making work, and you know, it can there can be a cost for entry, but if you do have those digital tools, once you have them, you're not like having to spend money on that physical material. And that's also a big part of why, actually, come to think of it, a big part of why I started making digital art in the first place was just cost and just not having the ability to do printmaking and things like that. So it's like, I still want to make conceptual art. I still want to make, you know, these interesting things, but I have to find a way to, you know, create them in this other plane. And now some of those things have been able to come out to the real world, which, yeah, I think they cross over sometimes.
Yeah, that reminds me too about like the influence or the look that you give at music. Like they've been doing that for way longer, I believe, like, or at least more intensively. Like, okay, they like musicians discovered that no, maybe you cannot afford a drum set, maybe you cannot do this, but all the digital tools, like maybe it won't have the same sound, but you can actually create. And what's I forget the name, like, but there has been a lot of artists that just started like super young and from zero, just like playing on their laptops and electric, and created this amazing albums. Is that something that were you inspired by that at all, like, or was that something like?
I mean, to some degree, I think as I got more into music as well, like I mean, the blues are a big influence. I think like it's American music. It's the most American music. It's Black American music, but it's also about like, you know, it's about the struggle. It's about, you know, making something beautiful out of very little. You know, sometimes you're just hearing washboards, but they start to sound like rain on the ceiling or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think like for me, like especially with like the Wallpaper Wednesdays and things like that, like I don't know how many people realize like how mundane some of those textures are, and like how sometimes I'm just blowing up, you know, a little piece of trash or something and extracting fine works from that. And you know,
for those who don't know, Vlad actually has this really cool project that it's he will put wallpaper, you know, for your cell phones, like on Wednesdays. So he takes everything from photo to digital, and that was just an intro for y'all to know what we were talking about. But yeah, can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so I started Wallpaper Wednesday around like, I think about 2013 or so. It was just an idea for me to maintain a consistent practice and make work, and I was also trying to think of like ways to give away art, because I'd always liked that idea of like, you know, finding a golden ticket in a chocolate bar or something like that. But I was thinking of like a better way of like putting my art out there, making it accessible, and then also not like taking a financial loss on it. So I started thinking about like all these kind of studies and things that I was putting together at the time, and that eventually led me to think like, you know, I'm holding this phone and everybody has one, and if everybody has a phone, then like doesn't everybody have a venue? And then I just started really thinking about like how often you look at that lock screen, and so that's kind of where the idea started. And then I think it was like December 2013 or so, I started making a weekly wallpaper, and you know, at this point I'm over around 130, 139 or something like that. And they don't happen as regularly as they used to. Sometimes they happen every 2 weeks. But for me, it was a cool way of just like experimenting, pushing myself to make stuff, and also just kind of creating art that other people could enjoy and for free. And I like the idea that, you know, a stranger might be using one of those that somebody that's not even in Austin or Texas might be using that as a wallpaper somewhere, and that's cool for me. So yeah, that's kind of where the idea started, and a lot of them, you know, they range from drawings, like you said, to photography, and a mixture of the two things. Sometimes it's, you know, physical drawings that get overlaid and then photographed and then scanned in, and then all this other manipulation happens. So it's also part of it too, is like a lot of those pieces, like the way that they're finished is on a computer. And so like the way I see them is with the glow of the screen. And so it's like, and that's when for me, it's like, all right, this is work that belongs on a screen. This is how I get to the final product. And so it's like, I feel like I'm tailoring that work to the medium, and it's kind of like, that's the most ideal way to view it in my mind. And anybody could view it that way.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's been fun. I've been just jumping on the website and seeing all the different projects, and it's such an accomplishment that it's very different work, but you can see the line. Everything makes sense, and everything goes back to you. Can you tell us, like you already touched a bit on what it's inspired you, and like what do you think about and the message? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like what's something constant in your mind, or is this like something that changes with, like right now we discuss like Black Lives Matter, like is that something, like are you going for something like of a greater good, or of a greater relevance, or is that something that changes daily to whatever the topic was? Like, is that more responsive or more in like a long-term mission?
Yeah, I guess for me, it's like trying to speak my truths, and also just, but also like not trying to be responsible for every, I guess, like social issue.
Yeah.
For me, it's like I'm reacting to what is happening around me, what I'm kind of taking in. And so like, especially with like the Pump Project show, that kind of started, a lot of that work started after the Freddie Gray rallies that were happening around the country. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. Sorry about that. Could you repeat the question?
No worries. Yeah.
Sorry, there's a lot to unpack.
I know. I'm sorry. Yeah. Let's like make more simple. Like, is that more responsive or just like a continued topic?
So definitely responsive. Because I was also making that work because it was the first kind of protest that I had ever seen that had such a widespread coverage through home footage and just people actually taking out their cell phones for the first time and recording and doing live feeds, and just to see the contrast, the stark contrast between the way things were being reported in the news and what you were seeing people on the ground. You know, to one of the ones that really stuck out in my mind were these kids that were protecting a convenience store. They were standing outside this convenience store, and these police officers were pulling up in riot gear, getting ready to spray them with tear gas because they were calling them looters. And this reporter actually ran into, you know, the line of fire or whatever, got up to these kids and started stalking them and interviewing them. And they're like, yeah, we know the owner. We're just making sure nobody loots this place. So those are the kind of things that I was documenting. So I started kind of thinking about the idea of like the screenshot as a camera. And so for me, it was like when I'm addressing those topics, it's also I'm taking from things that I'm seeing in my personal life, whether it be through the news or the internet, or social media, and how people are kind of responding to things, the kind of conversations that they're having. Because forums are also interesting. You get to see like a really honest and sometimes very bleak perspective on how people see things, and how, you know, not everybody is on the same page about social issues.
Yeah, definitely. And that brings me back to community. Like you keep creating and growing in this art scene. Can you tell me how is your perspective on growth and specifically to Austin, like an art scene, and how your community either helps you or inspires you to produce and collaborate?
Yeah, I think for me, the best thing I have found in the Austin art scene personally is just the willingness to collaborate, for people to have conversations and to be open to new folks. Just because when I got initially involved in the Austin art scene, like I kind of mentioned earlier, like I had no previous experience or real exposure to an active art scene, and just to be welcomed, and then as a young kid to be taken seriously and also be asked to collaborate was super important. And for me, it's also important to extend that myself to younger artists as I've grown into an older artist in Austin, and more involved in the scene and know people. I think it's important to, for me to take what I've learned and the resources that I do have now, and try to extend them to other creatives, and to and to do so, I think it's also important to be engaged in the community. So when there were openings and public events happening, to go to new spaces and try to meet new people, just to be engaged and aware of where the community is going, because I think something that every space is in danger of at all times is getting too old and not staying aware and relevant of what's happening. So trying your best to stay engaged is important, and just creating opportunities. And I think at CoLab, what we've been able to start doing in the last year or so is start paying artists stipends and providing them with budgets and things like that. And ultimately, I think my goal as an artist in this town is to sustain a creative practice, and then also to help foster and create environments where artists can grow and kind of get their own agency and do their own shows and curate their own things. I find I like to encourage younger artists to do a homegrown space. Start a gallery in your house. But it's safe.
yeah. And that brings me to the next question. Because space is something that Austin has been dealing with for some time now, and it's every moment, every year, every month, it's harder to get space. How do you move without a traditional studio space, maybe, or a traditional exhibit space? I mean, I know you have some with CoLab. Shout out to the CoLab kids.
Yeah.
But also I know that as we talked earlier, you've been able to adapt to different non-traditional spaces.
Yeah, I've actually I've never had a studio space, which I think surprises people sometimes. So that has not always been ideal, because sometimes you end up with your place crammed full of crap and not being able to move around, or inhaling.
And now with the cat, it's going to be a different challenge.
But it's I think it's totally doable. I feel for me, it's the creative thing is also part of my personal life, and I find it hard to separate. So when I do feel inspired to make something, it's I can get up and move over to my desk or something and start making something. I think it's in order to maintain a practice and to be resourceful. And if you can't afford a space, you just have to try to make friends, try to find people that have yards. I think once you know enough artists, you'll probably know somebody with a truck, and get good at buying them a 6-pack or something like that.
Yeah.
Hanging out, be willing to help other people, because that's what I found as well. Because I was just very open to learning things when I started out. So I was usually the person that would say yes all the time if somebody asked me for a hand on something, and that paid back a tenfold, because it was I gained a lot of great friends that way, and then I also got a lot of assistance with stuff. And sometimes you have an idea that is kind of just not financially realistic, and you have to put it on the back burner or save it for later. And I've done that with some ideas. Some projects or pieces that I've shown, maybe I came up with 3 or 4 years ago, and they only recently became a reality because I could realistically afford to make them. So I think it's important just to like be resourceful and be willing to, you know, work with, you know, used material. Like, don't just think of using traditional materials. Like ready-made stuff is interesting, and depending on, you know, what your spin on it is, it doesn't have to be like generic ready-made art.
Yeah.
Could be your own thing.
Yeah, for sure. And which brings me, do you ever do the like grants and stuff from the city for your art pieces?
Not really. No, I've for the most part, I have been able to self-fund, or I've been lucky enough to have worked with spaces that have provided at the least an artist fee, and at the most an artist fee and a stipend, which I've been very fortunate to have. But that's not to say that you know, I definitely encourage people to apply for grants and things like that, because it's a very much important part of collab and stuff. I'm just a bad example of an artist.
No, I was just curious because I know a bunch of people, and I know that's some limitation, but I also know that it is very intimidating process, and as well, like, do you really like? Yeah, it's just hard to share.
I've definitely done a lot more like open call jury kind of things. And yeah, I think you just have to get out of your comfort zone. And what I've definitely learned from the people that I know get the most grants, that they usually have a stack of rejection letters next to the acceptance letters. So it's a big part of that job is like, yeah, you're going to get rejected by some of these, but the point is to try to apply for as many as you can. And not all those, sometimes some of those grants, if you do enough research, you'll learn like are not heavily applied to, can be a little easier to get. So it's always good to be looking out for that, especially if you want to sustain yourself solely off of your artwork.
Yeah, no, that's super hard. And just like being able to write like those sentences that are very specific. And like, I think like a lot of people might say like, no, I'll rather just keep working on the thing instead of just writing. But yeah, I was just curious. Cool. And then how are you engaging in this moment, since you cannot, because I'm a witness, like you're always supporting different artists, and it's always like lovely to know that we'll see your face for whatever happens, and it's a very nice presence to have around. But how are you spreading that support and love these days?
Yeah, I guess right now the main thing that I'm involved with is the collab projects open video call that we're doing. So we got together when we found out that, you know, there's very likely going to be a stay-at-home order, and start, you know, talking about, you know, how could we maintain our goals of supporting the Austin art community, and that's kind of where we came up with the idea of reallocating our budget for physical shows for the time being to this open video call. So it's only open to Austin artists. You know, videos could be short or long. And we, you know, you retain all ownership, and essentially we'll post that video on our Instagram account to show it, and then we'll also host it on our webpage, and then every artist that gets selected gets a $100 stipend. So it's not a whole lot, but I think it's still something, and it's just our way of like, you know, maintaining, flexing, or I guess like working on our curatorial muscle, staying engaged with what's happening. And also trying to, you know, continue supporting artists, you know, during this tough time. And if we can help financially a little bit, that's amazing. And as always, our goal is always, you know, what can we do to serve the Austin art community? So that's ongoing. So if anybody's interested in applying to that, they can go to Collab Projects TX on our Instagram, or collabprojects.org. So
yeah,
ongoing
thank
call.
You. Yeah, it's just so important, and again, like it brings back to accessibility, to be open, to be very working with the current times, and all of this. Yeah, video is so important right now, and in all ways, like as a documentation tool, as a, like just expression arts and all of the things. Like, yeah, I think after this, we're gonna definitely have a refreshed view on what art can do and what art can do in video and digital. Yeah. Great. Someone. Oh yeah. Thank you. Big Medium
Nice.
we just posted the link so that
Great.
you guys can go and apply. Cool. What are there other projects that you're working on right now?
And I guess the other project that's kind of ongoing right now is I'm in a collaborative group called Rossi Destin, my friend Peter Shugart, who's a San Antonio-based artist. And we're halfway through these two large routes that we're doing to carve our initials out into the Texas landscape while doing a performance art piece called Punk Ass Kids. So we're kind of on pause right now. We've done the first leg of the tour, which was the lowercase d through the state of Texas. And then right now we're just kind of like checking in with each other and working on merchandise for an eventual last tour stop whenever we can get back
Awesome.
on the road. So that's a ongoing project that, yeah, we'll see how this current situation affects the timing on it, but is coming at some point.
And can you tell us a bit more about it? Because I read up some and it looks super interesting and fun.
Yeah, so Rossi Destin is a collective that me and Peter started probably back in 2012 or so. We were kind of experimenting with a lot of like digital stuff, and we're working on an online gallery called Clarkson at the time. And we decided to start making collaborative work. And the idea behind the work was kind of like slacker art. So just kind of like, how can you make the most efficient work with the least amount of effort? And so we kind of came up with this idea for an instructional piece called Punk Ass Kids. And the piece is it's a kind of like a DIY instructional happening that you could do with your friends. And so you create a playlist, you find a place to park your car with yourself or a few other people. You open all your car doors up, you shuffle the playlist and play it as loud as you can. And then you just gotta hang out and do whatever you want. You know, you could dance or, you know, hang out in the car, have conversations, read poetry, whatever you want to do, have a little happening. So we kind of came up with that piece back in college. Peter transferred, went to SVA, finished up school there, came back a few years ago, and we kind of revived the idea and started thinking about taking that performance piece on the road and documenting those travels through small towns in Texas. And then I'm kind of like making a work around it that's kind of referencing like music, concert tour culture, and tour shirts and merchandise and things like that. So that's kind of like what we're accumulating material for at the moment.
That sounds so fun. Yeah. Please let us know whenever you're at it, because we'd love to hear more about it. Well, I don't know if you'll have some questions for us. I think like there's so much to talk about, like that you have so like your media are so wide that I'd be happy to see if some of our audience have like specific questions for you. Yeah. Otherwise I can keep going.
Cool. Hopefully that was cohesive.
So I'll chime in to like give a little reintroduction about how people can ask questions. If you want to raise your hand, then I can call on you and have you turn your microphone on. So if anybody has a question, you should be able to raise your hand and we can address questions that way. But in the meantime, if we're not having any questions, I can put the slideshow back up and we can sort of like re-reference some of the things like the Wallpaper Wednesday and Rossi Destin, because we saw it at the beginning, but people might not have put it together.
Yep.
Okay, we don't have any questions yet, so I'm going to do that if that's cool, guys.
Yeah, because also I talked about digital media a lot, but there's photography, there's performance, sculpture, like there's, yeah. I think that's a great idea to go back to the work and talk from there.
Yeah, so I left high school a photographer. I left college a sculptor.
Yeah.
And now I guess I'm a digital artist.
So these are
Are
all
we
the
gonna see?
wallpaper Wednesdays. Oh, sorry, I just wanted to.
No, you're good. I just saw the cat and thought, like, are we gonna see more
Yeah.
cat work now?
Yeah, maybe. This was Daisy, who was a cat that used to hang out at the old collab space. So she is a veteran of the Austin art scene. She was there for a lot of the early collab days. But the one on the very left right there is like the very first Wallpaper Wednesday. So that was kind of like the beginning of just kind of experimenting with these kind of abstractions and pulling things out of analog and digital photography. And then it's kind of progressed a bunch since then. And that's from Transmission.
Yeah, you told me like it has something to do with the Rossi Dustin, right? Like it kind of got it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so this is like these two posters that are up right now. We made for St. Edward's had a flat file exhibition last year, and they invited us to contribute some things. So we kind of took that as a good opportunity to start working on like our promotional posters for the Punk Ass Kids World Tour. So they're just kind of like these maximalist, crude, like digital renderings that are just kind of like promotional material for the concerts or for the tour stops and stuff like that. And we like to work with tech, so it's a lot of like I guess like especially with collaboration, one of the reasons I like to collaborate is my work can be very serious at times. So something like Rossi Dustin, it's still like heavily conceptual, but is a little bit more playful. And while it may look crude, we're definitely like kind of pulling inspiration from some of our favorite artists, like Yoko Ono or William Burroughs and things like that. And this
Someone
was our.
asked, where does the name Rosie Dustin come from?
So Rossi Dustin, when I was in college with Peter, we were just kind of hanging out, getting to know each other, talk about art and things like that, and got college drunk one day, and Peter ended up crashing on my couch that day. We were kind of hanging out the next day, watching TV, and we were talking about like this idea of the group, like maybe we should start a group or whatever. We're like, why don't we like start flipping through the channels, and the first two names we hear, that's our name. And so we just started flicking through, and Rossi was the first name we heard. Dustin was the second name. I forget the context of those names or what shows they were, but it sounded good, and it gets stuck from there. So when Peter moved back to San Antonio, then the idea came to it was really easy to keep the name. And it's a way.
Do you? Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say we kind of joke about it too. So it's like the way we see it as well. It's like we're if I'm here, I'm Vladimir. If Peter was here, he's Peter. But if we're in the same room together, then we're Rossi Dustin. So it's kind of like also. It's kind of like if you look up kayfabe, it's like kayfabe. It's like wrestling.
And do you play music actually?
For myself, but not really. I mean, there were some songs that I did put in the Brim show of personal recordings, but I didn't like heavily advertise that. I think it was something that if you were listening to the music, it might jump from an actual song to one of me playing something. Like I've kind of joked about this with friends before, but it's like I really love music, and I don't want to ruin music like I ruined art. so it's more of a personal thing, but it's definitely like heavily influential in my stuff, and comes out in ways, but it's not like the medium that I'm most comfortable with. So it's not really like stuff that I make to exhibit as much as my visual stuff. It's kind of more for myself, I guess.
And what instrument?
Like guitar and stuff. One of those douchey guitar artists.
No, that makes sense. Yeah, because again, like it's
I keep
inspiration,
it on,
and it's
I keep it on the low.
yeah, that's fair. But yeah, I was wondering because of that, because of the influence that I mean, I guess everyone does hear music, but your work and your path seems to be very yeah, just alongside.
Yeah.
Okay, someone asked if you sing too.
I think, God damn it. Yes, Austin knows I sing. Austin's heard me sing. Yeah. I sing sometimes. I've sang a few times. But
Austin, tell us what
yeah.
you think about his singing.
Rebecca has a question. Hey, Rebecca, I'm going to allow you to talk, and then you can turn your microphone on.
Sweet.
So, hey. So I jumped in a little late, so stop me if you guys already talked about this, but I'd be really interested to hear where your head's at, or where you see yourself with performance work, because I'm thinking about the performance that you did for Fusebox 60 for 60, which is like really moving and really powerful and very vulnerable. And, you know, that was a little different than, you know, it's kind of different to see those in-person performances as opposed to the documentation, obviously, of the performances that you're doing, right? And so I just, you know, do you see yourself doing more of that, or are you more comfortable?
Yeah, it's like I really love performance art. I just find it tough to do something longer than maybe like a 5-minute thing. So I feel like 60 has been pretty great for doing something like these kind of smaller performances, because it gives me like a nice little moment to have. And for me, it's also like, I guess when I think about performance art, going back to like the music influences, it's like I like the speed of a punk song. It's like a 2-minute and it's done and it says everything it needs to say. And so, yeah, I definitely would like to make more performance. I think it's also just about finding the proper venue for it. Because I've had performance ideas for some of like the 2 solo exhibitions I did, but they didn't come to fruition at the end just because I wasn't able to like really pull it together. There's something about a stage that I think helps me with performances. So like the ability to be in that lit area for 60 and 60, to go in with a mission, makes it easier for me, because a lot of my performances start with like an outline, and then I'm kind of like reacting to the audience as well to accentuate certain things.
Well, in the performance, you know, you did also, you know, that lent itself to your writing, which I know you also do a bit of. You made like that zine that had mostly your writing in it, right?
Yeah. That was another one where like as one of my friends started a zine shop with his partner, Spend Time Zine, and had asked me if I'd be interested in putting in a zine. And you know, it's like kind of like music. I tend to write a bit and just keep it to myself, so it was kind of like a good reason to pull it together and present some of it. For me, it's also like, and this might go back to like not being the best at applying for grants, is that probably making a lot most of the time, and then just kind of like tucking some of that away, and some of it comes out if people ask to see it. Because and that's the other thing too. Like a lot of the shows that I've been able to do have come from like, you know, engaging in a conversation with somebody who has a space, and then that leads to like, what are you working on? And then I can kind of unload my thoughts for the year.
Thank you, Rebecca. Those were awesome questions.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Any more questions? Guess not.
You can put Austin on the spot. I can turn your microphone on. Oh, Tammie has a question. Okay.
Yeah, Tammie.
Your microphone on.
Hey guys, how are you doing?
Doing
Hey,
good.
thank you for joining us.
How you doing, Tammie?
Yeah, it's good to see you, Vlad. So I have a question, and this is kind of from the perspective of an educator is that you graduated from University of Texas and you continue to live here. And oftentimes that transition from undergrad to like figuring out how to make your way into the world of practice for yourself is so difficult.
Mhm.
The reason why most artists just stop making work like within 3 years.
Yeah.
So it's not already had, you were already building a community beyond school when you were in school, but can you just kind of talk more about like that transition? I feel like it's something that people don't understand is really difficult for everyone.
Yeah.
How to find a way to the other side.
Yeah, I think a lot of my journey was, trying to feel comfortable and part of the community. And it's not that I didn't have great educators at UT, but I can't say that UT was the reason that, I stayed here or that I felt like an artist or that I could call myself an artist. Yeah. A lot of that came from, get a collab giving me agency, and my path was definitely not the most traditional path just because of how things kind of fell together, and maybe that's the case with anything in life, but when I graduated, I was given this opportunity to take over like the curation of the BitRes. And for me, I had already made up my mind that I wanted to stick around. Grad school at the time didn't really seem so appealing, so I kind of just decided to stick around and continue volunteering with CoLab because I felt that it would give me the ability to feel independent in my thoughts and like free of the academic constraints that I kind of felt like were kind of beginning to box me in my personal practice. So a lot of it was like, I'd say like volunteering was a big part of it, just because it was the way that I was able to actually like not just show that I was interested, but that I was willing to work, and that also let people know that I was taking it seriously, which led to more friendships and acquaintances and things like that. So I think like the toughest part of the transition is just like putting yourself out there, because you can feel very lonely if you don't know anybody in the scene. Yeah, it's tough. And you're right. Actually, one of the things that also stuck out in my mind is I got to go on a travel grant to LA that Amanda Rosso, who's the artist at the VAC, had kind of like suggested us and given us a recommendation letter and stuff like that. And we were interviewing her, and we asked her, that classic question of like, what's the best advice you can give a young artist? And her advice was, keep making work, because a lot of people haven't made something in a month. If you haven't made something in a month, you're probably not going to make anything ever again. And that always stuck with me. So I think it's important that even in part of the Wallpaper Wednesday thing too, it's like, even if you don't feel like it, if once you're out of school, you really need to get on yourselves to make things, or that goes away very quickly. It's really easy to lose like your drive if you don't have the structure, and it's hard to create the structure. You have to kind of find it for yourself. And if volunteering is a good way to get in, just because it gives you an excuse to get up and maybe go to an opening.
Thank you, Tammie. I think we're super close to noon, and I don't know if Jordan has any last messages. Thank you so much, Vlad, for being here with us. It's again like the engagement, being around the community. We value your presence so much, and your art too. So thank you everybody for joining us and for staying with in this coffee chat. I'll leave it to Jordan to say goodbye.
Yeah, I was just gonna say thank you all again for showing up. These will continue to happen every Thursday at 11. Next week we actually have Jill Schroeder from Grey Duck, so make sure not to miss that. You can always find the Zoom link in our Facebook events. And thank you so much, Vlad and Coca.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Peace everyone.
Yeah.
This is that moment I was talking about. Bye.